It was a beautiful Saturday afternoon in downtown Phoenix. The annual community festival was in full swing with families enjoying food trucks, live music, and local vendors selling their goods. Children ran around with balloons while parents chatted and relaxed under the warm Arizona sun. Everyone seemed to be having a great time. Among the crowd was a 19-year-old college student named Amy Chen. She had come to the festival with her younger brother to support their cousin who was performing with the local dance group. Amy was a quiet girl who studied business at the community college and worked part-time at a bookstore. She had never been in any kind of trouble before and was known among her friends as someone who always tried to help others. The festival had been running smoothly all day until around 3 in the afternoon when a small issue started near the main stage area. Some vendors had set up their booths slightly outside the designated zones, and festival organizers were asking them to move back a few feet for safety reasons. Most vendors were happy to cooperate and started adjusting their setups. However, one food truck owner seemed frustrated about moving his truck. He had been selling tacos all day and was worried about losing his good spot near the stage where most people were gathered. The situation was not really a big deal, just a simple misunderstanding that could have been solved with a quick conversation. Officer Robert Davidson happened to be walking by when he heard the discussion getting a bit louder. Davidson was a veteran police officer with 15 years on the force, but unfortunately, he was known for having a short temper and often made situations worse instead of better. Many people in the community had complained about his aggressive behavior in the past, but somehow he always managed to keep his job when Davidson approached the scene. Instead of calmly talking to the vendor and helping solve the problem, he immediately started shouting orders. His voice was loud and intimidating, which made everyone around feel uncomfortable. The vendor tried to explain his concerns about moving the truck, but Davidson was not interested in listening. Amy was standing about 10 feet away, watching her cousin's dance performance when she noticed what was happening. She could see that the police officer was being unreasonably harsh with the food truck owner, who was clearly just trying to make a living. The vendor was an older man who seemed scared and confused by the officer's aggressive approach. Being the kind person she was, Amy decided to step forward and try to help calm things down. She approached slowly and politely said, "Excuse me, officer, but I think there might be a misunderstanding here. The vendor seems willing to move his truck. He just needs a few minutes to pack up safely." What happened next shocked everyone who was watching. Instead of appreciating Amy's attempt to help, Officer Davidson turned his anger toward her. He told her to mind her own business and stay out of police matters. His tone was harsh and completely inappropriate for the situation. Amy was surprised by his reaction but remained calm. She explained that she was just trying to help and that she thought everyone could work together to solve the problem peacefully. She spoke in a respectful tone and kept her hands visible, doing everything right according to how people are supposed to interact with police officers. But Davidson was having none of it. He seemed to take Amy's words as some kind of challenge to his authority. His face turned red and he started moving closer to her in an intimidating way. Several people in the crowd began to notice what was happening and started paying attention to the confrontation. Amy took a small step back, feeling uncomfortable with how close the officer was getting. She tried to de-escalate the situation by saying she would just go back to watching the performance and leave him to handle things. But as she started to turn away, Davidson grabbed her arm roughly. "You're not going anywhere," he said in a threatening voice. "I think you need to learn some respect for law enforcement." The people around them couldn't believe what they were seeing. Here was a police officer physically grabbing a young woman who had done absolutely nothing wrong except try to help solve a minor problem peacefully. Amy looked scared and confused, not understanding why she was being treated this way. "Please, let go of my arm," Amy said politely. "I haven't done anything wrong. I was just trying to help." But Davidson's grip only tightened. He seemed to be getting more angry by the second, as if Amy's calm and respectful behavior was somehow making him more upset. Several people in the crowd started pulling out their phones to record what was happening. What came next was completely unnecessary and shocking to everyone watching. Instead of simply letting Amy go back to enjoying the festival, Davidson decided to arrest her for what he claimed was interfering with police business and disorderly conduct. Neither of these charges made any sense given what had actually happened. As Davidson tried to force Amy's hands behind her back to put handcuffs on her, she naturally tried to maintain her balance. She wasn't resisting arrest or fighting back in any way, just trying not to fall over as the officer pushed and pulled her around roughly, but Davidson interpreted her movements as resistance. In his anger and frustration, he twisted Amy's arm with much more force than was necessary. The sound that followed was something nobody in the crowd would ever forget, a sharp crack that could be heard even over the music from the festival. Amy immediately cried out in pain. Her face went pale, and tears started streaming down her cheeks. It was obvious to everyone watching that her arm was seriously injured. She begged the officer to let her go, saying that her arm was broken and she needed medical help. The crowd that had gathered around them was shocked into silence for a moment. They couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. A police officer had just broken a young woman's arm over a simple misunderstanding that could have been solved with a conversation. People started shouting for someone to call an ambulance. Others were demanding that Davidson stop what he was doing and get medical help for Amy, but the officer seemed oblivious to the seriousness of what had just happened. Instead of immediately calling for medical assistance, he continued trying to arrest Amy. Ignoring her obvious pain and injury, Amy was now sitting on the ground, cradling her injured arm and crying. The crowd around them was getting more and more upset, with many people filming everything that was happening. Some were calling 911 for medical help, while others were trying to get the attention of other police officers who might be more reasonable. The festival atmosphere had completely changed. The music seemed too loud and inappropriate given what was happening. Parents were pulling their children away from the scene, not wanting them to see a police officer hurting someone. Vendors were stopping their work to watch in disbelief. Through all of this, Davidson continued to act as if he had done nothing wrong. He radioed for backup, claiming that he had a situation with an uncooperative suspect. His description of events bore no resemblance to what everyone else had witnessed. He made it sound like Amy had been violent and dangerous, when in reality she had been nothing but polite and helpful. As more people gathered and the situation became more tense, it seemed like things were about to get much worse. The crowd was angry about what they had seen, and Davidson was showing no signs of backing down or getting Amy the medical help she desperately needed. It was at this critical moment, when the situation seemed ready to explode into something much bigger and more dangerous, that an unexpected figure appeared in the crowd. Someone who would change everything that was about to happen and turn this terrible situation into something completely different. The crowd around Amy and Officer Davidson was getting bigger by the minute. People were pulling out their phones, recording everything that was happening. Some were calling for ambulances, others were trying to get help from festival security. The whole situation felt like it was about to spiral completely out of control. Amy was still sitting on the ground, holding her broken arm close to her body. Tears were running down her face, not just from the physical pain, but from the shock of what had just happened to her. She kept looking around at all the people staring at her, feeling embarrassed and scared. All she had wanted to do was help solve a simple problem, and now she was injured and being treated like a criminal. Davidson was getting more aggressive as the crowd grew. He didn't like all the attention and cameras pointed at him. Instead of focusing on getting medical help for Amy, he was more concerned about controlling the situation and making himself look like he was in charge. He kept shouting at people to back away and stop filming, which only made them more upset. More police officers were starting to arrive at the scene. Davidson had called for backup, telling them he had a dangerous situation with an uncooperative suspect, but when these officers arrived and saw what was really happening, some of them looked confused. They could see an injured young woman sitting on the ground and an angry crowd, but nothing that looked like a real threat or emergency. The festival organizers were also getting worried. This was supposed to be a fun family event, and now they had police cars with flashing lights and an injured person. They were trying to figure out how to handle the situation without making things worse. Some were talking about shutting down the festival early if things didn't calm down soon. Amy's younger brother had been watching the dance performance when someone told him what was happening to his sister. He came running over and was shocked to see Amy hurt and crying. He tried to get close to her, but Davidson wouldn't let him approach. The boy was only 16 and didn't understand why his sister was being treated this way. "That's my sister," he kept saying. "She didn't do anything wrong. She needs to go to the hospital." But Davidson told him to stay back and threatened to arrest him too if he didn't listen. This made the crowd even more angry. Now they were watching a police officer not only hurt an innocent young woman, but also intimidate her teenage brother, who was just worried about his family. The tension in the air was thick. You could feel that something bad was about to happen. Some people in the crowd were starting to get really upset, and Davidson was responding by becoming even more aggressive. It felt like the situation was a powder keg ready to explode. That's when something unexpected happened that nobody saw coming. Walking through the crowd, trying to see what all the commotion was about, was someone who most people recognized immediately. Ronda Rousey, the famous UFC fighter, had been in Phoenix for a charity event earlier that day. She was known around the world for her fighting skills, but also for being someone who stood up for people who couldn't defend themselves. Ronda had been planning to stop by the festival after her charity work was done. She loved community events and often tried to support local activities when she was traveling. She had been walking around, taking pictures with fans and enjoying the music. When she heard the shouting and saw the crowd gathering, at first, she thought maybe there was a medical emergency or some kind of accident. But as she got closer and saw what was really happening, her expression changed completely. She could see Amy on the ground, obviously hurt and scared. She could see Davidson standing over her in an intimidating way, and she could see the crowd getting more and more upset. Ronda had grown up in a family that taught her to always protect people who needed help. Her mother had been a pioneer in women's martial arts, and she had raised Ronda to believe that strength should be used to help others, not to hurt them. When Ronda saw what was happening to Amy, all of her protective instincts kicked in, but Ronda was also smart. She knew that charging into the situation without thinking could make things worse for everyone, especially for Amy, so she took a moment to assess what was going on and figure out the best way to help. She could see that Davidson was feeling cornered and defensive. The crowd was angry, and he was responding by trying to show more authority and control. This was exactly the kind of situation that could turn dangerous very quickly. Someone needed to step in and change the whole dynamic before things got worse. Ronda began moving through the crowd, not in a rushed or aggressive way. She moved with the confidence of someone who was used to high-pressure situations, someone who knew how to stay calm when everyone else was losing their cool. People in the crowd started to notice her and whisper to each other, "Is that Ronda Rousey? What's she doing here? Maybe she can help that girl." As Ronda got closer to the center of the action, she could see more clearly what had happened. Amy's arm was definitely broken. Ronda had seen enough injuries in her fighting career to recognize one when she saw it. The young woman was in real pain and needed medical attention immediately. She could also see that Davidson was completely focused on trying to control the crowd and defend his actions. He wasn't paying any attention to Amy's medical needs, which was completely wrong. In Ronda's mind, the first priority should always be helping someone who was hurt, not worrying about who was right or wrong. Ronda had dealt with aggressive people before, both in and out of the fighting ring. She knew that sometimes the best way to handle someone who was being unreasonable was to stay calm and confident, but firm. She had learned that you didn't always need to fight to win. Sometimes you could win just by being the most reasonable person in the room. As she got closer, Ronda started thinking about the best approach. She knew that Davidson probably felt like everyone was against him, which was making him more defensive. She needed to find a way to de-escalate the situation without making him feel like she was just another person attacking him. At the same time, she knew that Amy needed help right away. The longer they waited to get her medical attention, the worse her injury could become. Ronda had seen fighters try to tough out injuries that needed immediate treatment, and it never ended well. The crowd was getting more restless by the minute. Some people were shouting at Davidson, others were trying to comfort Amy, and still others were just trying to get a better view of what was happening. The whole scene was chaotic and getting worse. Festival security guards were also arriving, but they seemed unsure about what to do. This was clearly a police matter, but they could see that the police officer involved was part of the problem. They were caught between wanting to help Amy and not wanting to interfere with police business. Amy's brother was getting more desperate. He could see that his sister was in serious pain, and he didn't understand why nobody was helping her. He kept trying to get closer, but Davidson kept pushing him back. The boy was starting to cry, which made the crowd even more upset. That's when Ronda decided it was time to act. She had seen enough to understand what was happening, and she knew that someone needed to step in before the situation got completely out of hand. Amy needed medical help, the crowd needed to calm down, and Davidson needed someone to help him see that he was making everything worse. Taking a deep breath, Ronda stepped forward into the center of the chaos. Her presence immediately changed the energy of the whole scene. People stopped shouting and started paying attention. Even Davidson paused what he was doing and looked at her with surprise. Everyone there knew who Ronda Rousey was. They had seen her fight in the UFC, they had watched her in movies, and they knew her reputation as someone who didn't back down from a challenge. But they also knew that she was someone who fought for good causes and stood up for people who needed help. As Ronda stepped into the center of the situation, everything seemed to slow down for a moment. The crowd got quieter, waiting to see what she would do. Davidson looked confused and uncertain for the first time since the whole thing started. And Amy looked up with hope in her eyes, maybe thinking that finally someone with enough influence was there to help her. This was the moment that would change everything that happened next. When Ronda stepped into the middle of the situation, everything seemed to freeze for a moment. The angry shouting from the crowd died down to whispers. Even Officer Davidson stopped what he was doing and stared at her with surprise. Nobody had expected to see a world-famous UFC fighter at their local community festival, especially not in the middle of a crisis like this. Ronda looked around calmly, taking in the whole scene. She could see Amy on the ground, still holding her injured arm and looking scared. She noticed Amy's teenage brother standing nearby, tears in his eyes as he watched his sister suffer. The crowd was pressed in close. Many people still holding up their phones to record everything that was happening, but most importantly, Ronda could see Officer Davidson. He looked angry, frustrated, and defensive all at the same time. His face was red, as she could tell he felt like everyone was against him. Ronda had dealt with people like this before, people who felt cornered and were likely to make bad decisions because of it. Ronda knew she had to be very careful about how she handled this. One wrong move could make Davidson even more aggressive, which could be dangerous for Amy and everyone else around. But she also knew that Amy needed medical help immediately, and someone had to step up and make that happen. Taking a slow, deliberate step forward, Ronda spoke in a calm but clear voice that everyone could hear. "Hi there, officer," she said, making sure to sound respectful but confident. "I'm Ronda Rousey. I can see there's been some kind of incident here, and I'm wondering if I can help in any way." Davidson looked confused for a moment. He clearly recognized her, but he seemed unsure about how to respond. Part of him probably wanted to tell her to mind her own business like he had told Amy, but he also knew that Ronda wasn't just any random person from the crowd. She was someone with influence and a public platform. "This is police business," Davidson finally said, but his voice didn't have the same aggressive tone he had been using before. "Everything is under control here." Ronda looked down at Amy, who was obviously in pain and definitely not okay. Then she looked back at Davidson with the expression that was polite but showed she wasn't buying his explanation. "I can see that this young woman is hurt pretty badly," Ronda said, keeping her voice calm and reasonable. "Has someone called for medical help? She really looks like she needs to get to a hospital." This was exactly the right approach. Instead of attacking Davidson or accusing him of doing something wrong, Ronda was focusing on what everyone could agree on, that Amy needed: medical attention. This made it harder for Davidson to argue with her or get defensive. Amy looked up at Ronda with hope in her eyes. For the first time since this whole nightmare started, someone with real authority was paying attention to her injuries instead of just treating her like a criminal. "Please," Amy said weakly. "My arm is really hurt. I think it's broken. I just, want to go to the hospital." Ronda knelt down next to Amy, careful not to make any sudden movements that might alarm Davidson. She had learned from her years in fighting that staying calm and moving slowly could prevent situations from escalating. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Ronda asked gently. "Amy," the young woman replied, wincing as she tried to shift her position. "Okay, Amy, I'm going to make sure you get the help you need," Ronda said with confidence. "Can you tell me what happened to your arm?" As Amy started to explain what had happened, Ronda listened carefully while also keeping an eye on Davidson. She could see that he was getting uncomfortable with the attention being focused on Amy's story instead of his version of events. "She was interfering with police business," Davidson interrupted. "She wouldn't follow instructions and became aggressive when I tried to arrest her." Several people in the crowd immediately started objecting to this description. They had all seen what really happened, and Davidson's version was completely different from reality. "That's not true," shouted someone from the crowd. "She was just trying to help. The cop grabbed her for no reason," yelled another person. Ronda could see that the crowd was getting worked up again, which was exactly what she didn't want to happen. She needed to keep everyone calm while she figured out how to get Amy the help she needed. Standing up slowly, Ronda addressed the crowd first. "I understand everyone is upset about what they saw," she said in a voice that was loud enough for everyone to hear but still calm and controlled. "The most important thing right now is making sure Amy gets medical attention. Everything else can be sorted out later." This had an immediate effect on the crowd. People started nodding and agreeing that Amy's health was the priority. Ronda had managed to redirect everyone's anger into concern for Amy, which was much more productive. Then Ronda turned back to Davidson. She knew this was the tricky part. She needed to get him to call for medical help without making him feel like she was challenging his authority or telling him what to do. "Officer Davidson," she said, reading his name tag, "I'm sure you want to make sure this young woman gets proper medical care. As a police officer, you probably have experience with injuries and know how important it is to get broken bones treated quickly." This was brilliant psychology. Instead of accusing Davidson of not caring about Amy, Ronda was giving him a chance to be the hero by doing the right thing. She was appealing to his professional pride and giving him a way to look good in front of everyone. Davidson seemed to think about this for a moment. Ronda could see him looking around at all the people watching and recording. He was starting to realize that this situation was going to be seen by a lot of people, and he needed to be careful about how he handled it. "Medical is already on the way," he said, though Ronda suspected this might not be entirely true. "That's great," Ronda replied. "While we're waiting for them to arrive, would it be okay if I stayed here with Amy? I have some experience with sports injuries, and I might be able to help keep her comfortable until the paramedics get here." Again, Ronda was being smart about how she phrased things. She wasn't demanding to stay or telling Davidson what to do. She was asking permission and explaining why it would be helpful. This made it much harder for him to say no without looking unreasonable. Davidson nodded reluctantly, and Ronda knelt back down next to Amy. She started talking to her in a quiet, comforting voice, asking about her pain level and whether she was feeling dizzy or nauseous. These were the kinds of questions that medical professionals ask, and it showed everyone watching that Ronda knew what she was doing. While she was talking to Amy, Ronda was also discreetly taking pictures with her phone. She was careful not to be obvious about it, but she wanted to document Amy's injuries and the scene around them. She knew that having clear evidence of what had happened would be important later. Amy's brother was finally able to get closer to his sister. Ronda waved him over and introduced herself. "You must be Amy's brother," she said kindly. "She's going to be okay, but she definitely needs to get to a hospital. Do you have a way to contact your parents?" The boy nodded and pulled out his phone to call their mother. Rhonda could hear him trying to explain what had happened, his voice shaking as he described seeing his sister get hurt. As they waited for the ambulance, Rhonda kept the conversation focused on Amy's medical needs and comfort. She didn't try to get Amy to tell her version of what happened while Davidson was listening, knowing that this could make the officer defensive again, but she did make sure to ask Amy some important questions about her medical history and any allergies she might have. This served two purposes. It was genuinely helpful information for the paramedics, but it also showed everyone watching that Rhonda was focused on Amy's well-being rather than just creating drama. The crowd had calmed down significantly since Rhonda arrived. Her calm, professional approach had changed the whole energy of the situation. People were still recording and watching, but the angry shouting had stopped. Instead, there was a sense that someone competent was finally taking charge and making sure Amy got the help she needed. Davidson seemed less aggressive too. He was still standing nearby and watching everything carefully, but he wasn't shouting at people or trying to control the crowd anymore. Rhonda's respectful but confident approach had made it harder for him to justify being aggressive. When the ambulance finally arrived, Rhonda made sure the paramedics had all the information they needed about Amy's condition. She also discreetly made sure they understood that this was an injury caused during a police encounter, which was important for their reporting. As the paramedics were preparing to take Amy to the hospital, Rhonda did something that surprised everyone. She pulled out her business card and gave it to Amy. "I want you to call me once you're feeling better," she told Amy. "I'm going to make sure you get the help you need to deal with all of this." This simple gesture showed everyone watching that Rhonda wasn't just going to walk away and forget about what had happened. She was making a commitment to follow up and ensure that Amy was treated fairly. The situation that had started as a potential disaster was now under control. But everyone knew this was just the beginning of a much bigger story. The ambulance doors closed behind Amy as the paramedics drove her to the hospital. Her brother rode along with her, still looking shocked by everything that had happened. The crowd at the festival was beginning to spread out, but many people were still talking about what they had just witnessed. Everyone had their phones out, and it was clear that videos and photos of the incident were already being shared online. Rhonda stood watching the ambulance drive away, feeling a mix of relief and concern. She was glad that Amy was finally getting the medical help she needed, but she knew this was far from over. The young woman would need surgery for her broken arm, and there would be a long road ahead dealing with the aftermath of what Officer Davidson had done. As the immediate crisis was over, Davidson seemed to realize that he was now standing in the middle of a very public situation that was not going to go away quietly. The festival had turned into something completely different, and there were dozens of witnesses who had recorded everything that happened. Rhonda approached Davidson one more time, but this time her tone was more serious than before. "Officer Davidson," she said, making sure other people could hear her, "I hope you understand how serious this situation is. That young woman suffered a significant injury during what should have been a simple conversation. A lot of people saw what happened here today." Davidson looked uncomfortable. He was starting to realize that his actions had consequences that went far beyond just dealing with one person at a festival. He mumbled something about filing his report and walked away toward his patrol car. But Rhonda wasn't done. She had made a promise to Amy, and she intended to keep it. Over the next few hours, the story of what happened at the Phoenix Community Festival began spreading across social media. The videos that people had taken showed the entire incident from multiple angles. You could clearly see Amy trying to help with the vendor situation, Davidson grabbing her roughly, and the moment when her arm was broken. But what really made the story go viral was the footage of Rhonda stepping in to help. People were amazed to see how she had managed to calm down such a tense situation and get Amy the medical help she needed. The contrast between Rhonda's calm, professional approach and Davidson's aggressive behavior was stark and obvious to everyone who watched the videos. Rhonda used her social media platforms to share her own account of what had happened. She posted photos from the hospital where she had gone to check on Amy after the festival. The pictures showed Amy in a hospital bed with her arm in a cast, looking tired but grateful. "Today I witnessed something that should never happen in our communities," Ronda wrote in her post. A young woman was seriously injured by someone who was supposed to protect her, all because she tried to help solve a simple problem peacefully. Amy is a college student who works hard and has never been in trouble with the law. She deserves so much better than what happened to her today. The post got millions of views within hours. Comments poured in from people around the world expressing support for Amy and praising Ronda for stepping in to help. Many people shared their own stories of having negative encounters with aggressive police officers, but Ronda didn't stop at just posting about it online. She knew that real change required more than just social media attention. The next day, Ronda contacted one of the best civil rights lawyers in Arizona and arranged for Amy to have legal representation at no cost. She also reached out to local civil rights organizations and community groups to make sure Amy had all the support she needed. Amy's medical bills were going to be expensive. The surgery to repair her broken arm cost thousands of dollars, and she would need physical therapy for months. Since Amy was a college student working part-time at a bookstore, there was no way she could afford these costs on her own. Ronda started a fundraising campaign to help cover Amy's medical expenses and lost wages while she recovered. Within just 2 days, people from all over the country had donated more than $50,000. The response was overwhelming and showed how much the story had touched people's hearts. Meanwhile, the Phoenix Police Department was facing intense pressure to investigate what had happened. The videos of the incident were clear evidence that Davidson had used excessive force against someone who posed no threat. Internal Affairs opened an investigation, and Davidson was placed on administrative leave while they reviewed the case. But Ronda wanted to make sure this wasn't just swept under the rug like so many other cases of police misconduct. She used her platform to keep attention focused on Amy's case and to demand accountability. She organized a peaceful rally in downtown Phoenix, calling for better police training and accountability. Thousands of people showed up, including many families who had their own stories of encounters with aggressive officers. Amy was still recovering from her surgery, but she attended the rally in a wheelchair, her arm still in a cast. When Amy spoke to the crowd, her voice was quiet but strong. "I never thought something like this could happen to me," she said. "I was just trying to help someone, and I ended up in the hospital with a broken arm. But thanks to Ronda and all of you, I know I'm not alone in this fight." The rally was peaceful and well organized, exactly the kind of event that brought positive attention to the issues they were fighting for. Local news stations covered it extensively, and the story continued to grow. 3 weeks after the incident, the Phoenix Police Department announced that Officer Davidson had been terminated from his position. The internal investigation had found that he had violated multiple department policies regarding the use of force and professional conduct. This was a significant victory, as police officers are rarely fired even when they clearly abuse their power, but the criminal justice system moved more slowly. The county prosecutor announced that they were reviewing the case to determine whether criminal charges should be filed against Davidson for assault. This process would take months, but at least it was moving forward. Amy's civil lawsuit against the city was also progressing. Her lawyer was confident that they had a strong case, given all the video evidence and witness testimony. The city would likely settle out of court rather than face a trial where the evidence against Davidson would be presented publicly. As Amy recovered from her surgery, she discovered that she had a talent for public speaking. She began visiting schools and community groups, telling her story and encouraging young people to stand up for what's right. She also started volunteering with organizations that work to improve police-community relations. Ronda stayed involved throughout Amy's recovery process. She visited Amy in the hospital several times and continued to check in with her regularly. When Amy was cleared to start physical therapy, Ronda even helped her find the best therapists in the area. But perhaps most importantly, Ronda used her influence to push for systemic changes in how police officers were trained and held accountable. She met with city officials, police chiefs, and community leaders to discuss reforms that could prevent incidents like Amy's from happening again. 6 months after the festival incident, Ronda and Amy appeared together on a national news program to talk about what had happened and what they were doing to create positive change. Amy's arm had healed completely, and she was back in school studying criminal justice. She had decided to dedicate her career to police reform and community advocacy. "What happened to me was terrible," Amy said during the interview. "But the response from Ronda and so many other people showed me that there are more good people in the world than bad ones. We can make things better if we work together," Ronda nodded in agreement. Amy showed incredible courage both during the incident and in everything she's done since then. She's turned something traumatic into a force for positive change. That takes real strength. The interviewer asked Ronda why she had decided to get involved instead of just walking away. "I was raised to believe that when you see someone being hurt, you step in and help," Ronda replied. "It doesn't matter if it's convenient or if it might cause problems for you. You do what's right." Amy needed help that day, and I was in a position to provide it. It's really that simple. A year later, the city of Phoenix implemented new training programs for police officers, focusing on de-escalation techniques and community relations. Amy was invited to help design the curriculum, bringing her unique perspective as someone who had experienced police misconduct firsthand. Officer Davidson was eventually convicted of assault and sentenced to probation and community service. He was also required to pay Amy's medical bills and lost wages. While many people felt the sentence was too light, it was still rare for a police officer to face any criminal consequences for their actions. Amy graduated from college with honors and got a job with a nonprofit organization that worked on police reform. She often spoke at conferences and training sessions, sharing her story to help others understand the human impact of police misconduct. Ronda continued to use her platform to advocate for justice and accountability. She remained friends with Amy and continued to support her work. The incident at the Phoenix Festival had shown both women that ordinary people could make extraordinary changes when they refused to accept injustice. The festival itself became an annual event dedicated to community unity and police-community relations. Amy and Ronda were invited back each year as honored guests, reminding everyone that positive change was possible when people stood up for what was right. Their story proved that sometimes the most important victories come not from fighting, but from having the courage to step forward when someone needs help.